today we're going to hear from Josh Trought. Is that how you say it?
I go with Trought. We'll go with Trought.
Trought. Today we're going with Trought. Josh Trought. Who a lot of you know or know about and have probably... Who here has been to DAcres? So it's an awesome place. If you haven't gotten up there yet, it is well worth the trip. Maybe both meetups can organize some field trips up there this year. Oh yeah, for the farm breakfast. Yeah, highly recommended. But not only has he been doing that for, is it close to 20 years he's been there? He now has written a book on it. So, and he'll sign copies afterwards. They'll be for sale back there. But we're going to start out, he'll talk to us for about an hour-ish, and there will be Q&A after that. But during the presentation, if you have clarifying questions, he is happy to have you raise your hand and interrupt him. So with that, I'm going to turn over to you. You can tell them what else you think they should know. All right, so welcome, Josh.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Josh, and first off, it's really exciting to see all the events you folks have coming up and everything, to see how vibrant the movement is down here. It's great to see that in action. I have two apologies to make first as well. One is an apology for bringing you inside on such a lovely day. I did not plan this. I just did one the other night, and it was terrible weather. It seemed to work really well for people, but sorry. And then the other part is I really don't have a presentation style that's academic. It's really more fluid and a little bit more, I'm not the PowerPoint type, so it's going to be a little looser. So feel free, too, in the Q&A to take it wherever you like. I'm totally comfortable with that. But yeah, let's get started. I do have my notes that I wrote on, and it was popcorn, yeah. It's free popcorn every day in Plymouth, Main Street, Man's Hardware. Saturdays, yeah. Not every day, but Saturdays. It's worth the trip.
Can folks back there hear? If at some point he's getting quiet and you can't hear, we're going to make him talk on a mic. So speak up. We have that option to do. So just tell us if it's needed. Go, Josh. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So in general, my motive for coming down here is to stir the pot, so to speak. It's I don't feel like I'm going to bring any singular expertise that's not already in this room, that's not already within the capacity of your organization and within, you know, the faces and the people that are sitting in front of me. I think all the knowledge is here. It's more me bringing, you know, a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of experimentation that we've done, and trying to stir the pot so you guys can bring your activities to a higher level. I also feel like I'm an envoy, so to speak, from the rest of the state. We've been trying to get things organized at a state level. So Central New Hampshire has a meetup, and up around us has a little permaculture groups forming. And we're trying to have a statewide rally gathering session on a yearly basis. And there's one this year at Orchard Hill on Alstead, New Hampshire, on August 22nd. So I'm giving you a little promo for that. That's my what was it called? Plug. Cool. All right, so a little bit about myself. There's going to be more or less 3 phases to this talk. A little bit about me, a little bit about what we do at DAcres, and a little bit about more of a societal questions. So the first part is about me. It's about the motivation for why I've chosen this path in life, and it has to do with my history and how I was brought up. I was brought up in eastern North Carolina. I had pretty affluent upbringing. My dad's a doctor, was a doctor, he's retired now. And so we moved to North Carolina, and he joined a medical practice in radiology, and he was the 5th partner in a group. And this is like 1978, 79 in North Carolina, and it's really an agrarian society that was in rapid transformation. So they were experiencing 7 to 10% growth in North Carolina at that time, which means every 7 to 10 years you get double everything. 7% growth means there's a 10-year doubling time. So, from 1979 to 1989, double the houses. You get single lane, becomes a double lane. Stop signs become street lights. Rapid transformation. And it really was destroying the agricultural heritage of that area. It's tobacco belt. And between, people becoming more aware of the ramifications of smoking and just the agricultural decline that was occurring, there was a lot of houses being built. A lot of growth, retail growth, some manufacturing growth, lots of tech growth. And so the neighborhood that, we settled into, in this little cul-de-sac, there was about 5 or 6 houses in it when we got there. It was like 40 odd when we left. And all the surrounding fields, all the surrounding forests, they just became houses. So you watch this happen, 3 or 4 or 5 a year, and then over the period of 10 years, wow, massive transformation. So that area, when I was a elementary school running around in the woods and through those fields, that became people's backyards. That became pavement. Just sort of a big psychological transformation to me to be a part of that. The thing that I find most striking about that whole situation is I really feel like sort of a beneficiary of that growth. My family, we made an extraordinary amount of money during that time as well. My dad being a physician, he didn't get into that to make a lot of money, but when he left his partnership, there's like 30-odd partners. It's a tremendous growth. And so that allowed me to, go to private school, to travel, to have resources to start a farm. So I'm a tremendous beneficiary to that, and at some level complicit in all of that growth. And it's left me, at times, a little bit depressed. And I tell you what made it worse. I went to college. Yeah, college. And went to college, and I went off to Colorado and studied the BS degree was called Environmental Conservation. And it was a depressing major. It was the problems of the world. You got overpopulation, resource depletion, climate chaos. There's some more pollution. Anybody else have ones that want to shout out?
Peak oil.
Peak oil, how about that? Yeah. Well, shoot, these issues, they didn't really offer up many solutions. It was more of this just litany of these are the bad things in the world. We're gonna keep studying them. Yeah. One of the things that I did learn during that time was that one of the climate scientists had, and this was 1989, 1990, had said that New Hampshire's climate would change into the climate of Georgia's within our lifetime. And sort of seeing that, starting to happen, and just sort of wondering, at the time I thought, well, that's sort of a cool thing. And I don't feel that way as much anymore. Just, living through it. It's not that exciting. But yeah, it was very depressing this time in college. Got out of college, and one of the best things that probably happened to me was learning about permaculture. And so permaculture is just very much a word, but I think it implies a lot, and it has a lot of capacity to bring people together and a lot of capacity to inspire people. So I'm for that. Permaculture to me is really, we'll go over my mini definition. Everybody's got their own definition of this thing. But, I'm sharing mine. It's a design science to me, and it's just like, it's got a little bit of architecture, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of sociology, a little bit of anthropology. It's all an integrated design science. So you integrate different schools of thought into a really holistic package, so you have a good perspective on issues. And that design science has two really important components to it. it has goals, and it has ethics. So, we're heading somewhere. That, to me, is very important. If we're going to study something, sociology or whatnot, yeah, let's identify a problem and get to the root of it and solve it. That's where I want to go. And then the ethics are super important. If engineering had ethics, if being involved in politics had ethics, we would be, at a higher level. The ethics of permaculture are fair share, earth care, and people care. And so earth care and people care are that's fairly easy to understand. I think the fair share, in my mind, is a situation where, say, we all get together on planet Earth and bake a big cake, yeah? It's a beautiful, delectous wedding-style cake. And the idea is, if you're not hungry, or if you're not in need of eating that cake, you can just pass it in and just look at it. Say, "Oh, that's a beautiful cake. I love that cake," and just pass it on to the next guy. And somewhere, or gal, and somewhere along the line, there's going to be somebody in need that's going to have to eat some of that cake. But they're not going to take it and chop it in half and take half of them. They're going to look at it and say, well, this is the amount, the fair share that I can take. And that's the appropriate amount that people should be digging in and getting busy with. So those are the ethics that I think, if we could approach our day-to-day life and our design decisions, our cultural basis around those ethics, it would certainly be a step up. For me, during that period, is when I learned about permaculture and then was presented with a really tremendous opportunity. And the opportunity is to become DAcres. And so, 1997, I was invited by my parents to move to New Hampshire to live with my aunt, my great aunt. My great aunt at that time was 89 years old. I was 25 years old. So there was a little age gap there. And just in terms of, where we were heading and what we were doing, I was just full of energy and single guy, just I don't know, I very naive. My aunt was, at her golden years. She was really, the deal was, Josh, you can go up to New Hampshire and get a farm enterprise started if you help take care of your aunt, and she doesn't have to go live in a nursing home. So it was at some levels my parents made a financial decision. Just saving a ton of money if he just doesn't have to go to the home. And her quality of life was potentially way higher. So it's like a win-win, and we'll let our son go experiment a little bit with farming. So it sort of, that's how it started. And I sort of had bigger intentions than that. My parents knew about this, but I don't think they really believed in it as much as I did. What I had gotten a hold of was a book resource, and had also been inspired by my aunt and uncle. The book resource is The Good Life. I read the Nearing's books and was just captivated. Just really threw me for a loop. If anyone's not familiar with it, you really need to look into it. It's Helen and Scott Nearing. Wrote a couple very influential works. Probably the most well-known is Living the Good Life, I think is what it's called.
Nope, that's Ewell Gibbons. Another good one.
But the Nearings Scott Nearing had been a economist at the Wheaton School of Business and had gotten ostracized from the academic world for protesting child labor as well as the First World War. So that sort of tells you how dated it was. He was actually tried for sedition for protesting the First World War. After that period, he sort of ostracized from academia, moves to the country, Vermont, and then Maine, and continues to write. and attract attention. And the place their last homestead in Maine is called the Good Life Center, and it's still open today. The books that he wrote, and they wrote collaboratively, really had a lot to do with the socioeconomics of our country, and later with more focus on homesteading and sort of the reasons why people would choose to homestead and live a rural, resilient lifestyle full of independence and freedom. That's how they would view it. So those books were very influential to me. My aunt and uncle were also very influential. My uncle had grown up in the Northern Kingdom, while my aunt had grown up in New Bedford, Mass. And so they met in Hartford, Connecticut. My uncle was in the insurance business making $200 a month, which is the most money my aunt had ever heard of anybody making. So she thought she had a real catch. But he had plans for her. She had not been, she'd grown up in the city, so she'd never been without running water and electricity. And he said, honey, it's time we should move to the country. And so took the family and moved to Dorchester, New Hampshire, which at that time had 90 people in it. And no electricity, and no running water. And my aunt said she cried for the first 2 years. Like, really, it was a traumatic experience. But what they had been searching for in 1942 was freedom and independence, and to get away from the rat race and the pollution and all the city stuff. And so she moved up there, and they became very independent. She was an artist. She was in the New Hampshire League. She did a lot of decorative art, taught classes till 3 months before she died at age 95. And I had been coming up there my whole life. And it was just so inspiring to me my whole life to come from rural North Carolina, where the culture, the agriculture history and legacy of North Carolina was getting swept aside, pushed down, in favor of this new growth, this new bourgeois type, drive to the subway and get a sub rather than eat home cooking. So we drove up to New Hampshire and back into another world. You pull in there and there's fresh soup and bread on the wood stove. There's a horse and chickens in the yard. It's a different place than the sterile, retail-oriented world that I had been exposed to in my youth, with that exception. Like the 2 weeks I spent in New Hampshire every year was like a vacation to another planet. Because my aunt and uncle were really living that close to the land life that was so different than what I'd been exposed to in this rapidly changing environment in North Carolina. So when I moved there in 1997, we had these sort of dreams of my family had this legacy, first the family farm, and then my parents had this sort of interpretation of like an art co-op or an artist commune type place. And then I had this interpretation of veneerings and like an Elliott Coleman model where we'd be doing lots of salad greens and four-season gardening. And we really... Where can I take this? There's two ways I can go right now. Where we eventually went with DAcres was more for on-site purposes, trying to meet our essential needs. And so our activities at DAcres, like on-site, are really directed towards food, housing, clothing, food and water, and community building, education, sort of just really getting after our fundamentals on the farm. The broader goals of DAcres are to reach out into the community at large and interact with them to supply, to build a greater regional economy. So we're really looking to, on the 200 acres that we're working, really try to localize the economy and be independent and self-sufficient. and then branch out as much as we can in the neighborhood, so to speak, in the Penny-Baker Valley, and be a catalyst for the greater community. Those ideas took a while to matriculate, to grow. Where we started was just these really fundamental ideas of, oh, it's going to be a market garden. We're going to take a little bit of land and we're going to grow lettuce, rows of lettuce, and have, just that typical agricultural model. And it just didn't work. I'm going to take a step back here and tell you why it just didn't work. And it takes me back 200 years beforehand. And so, originally, we're going to take a step back. Originally, when Dorchester was settled, the king of England had given some the rights to Governor Wentworth to give some land to his buddies or whatnot in Dorchester. So this was in like 1764 or something like that, way early on, even before the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. So that was the initial, colonial push. So these colonials came in and they tried to do what they were familiar with in their economy, what they had imported from the British Isles. And so what they were familiar with was chop all these trees down and let's get some sheep on. Yeah. So they cleared all of New Hampshire. 90% of the forest got cut down, and everyone started raising sheep. And so you got like 1780s, 1790s, places booming, places growing. Everybody's moving into the neighborhood. Everything peaked around 1850. In Dorchester, there was 1,200 people, but they had cut down all of the trees, so they didn't really have much resource left. And the sheep market, it went bust. Between the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution, the free land in Ohio, everybody left town. More or less, by the time my aunt and uncle moved there was only 90 people. So you got from 1850 to 1940, from 1,200 people to 90 people. And I think it's a real lesson in how they approach their economy. Right? They destroyed the natural resources and tried to get into a monoculture. This is just bad practice, in my terms. And when I look back at it in 1997, when I moved to DAcres, I tried to do the same thing. Tried to take a model of four-season vegetable greens, lettuce production that we had become pretty familiar with in the West Coast, in a Zone 12 location. And then we tried to move to a Zone 3 location and try to do the same economy with poor soil, with a different customer base, and it crashed. All right? Nobody's really, especially in 1997, up in Dorchester, New Hampshire, no one's really interested in your high-dollar salad greens. The kind of salad that we were selling at that time. When we come from the West Coast, I've been farming around a little bit, and we've been on Orcas Island in the San Juans, and you could sell $20 pounds of salad greens to these Microsoft execs all day. They were like, yeah, this is great. Here's $20. And it's like up in the foothills where I live, no one's going to give you money for salad greens, really. It's just not a high-value commodity. And plus, the growing season's 3 months instead of 12 months of the year. And you don't have the soil. So you try to do I was trying to bring the economy of the British Isles into Dorchester once again. And it just doesn't work that way. So we had to diversify. That was a real lesson. Diversification, building off our natural resources, our existing natural resources, and really trying to build off the skills base of the people there and meet the needs of your clientele or your customers. So more or less a four-pronged approach to really build our economic vitality in Dorchester, because it wasn't just going to be salad greens off a three-month growing season. So that was a hard lesson, but it brought about, we had to invest. So we built a ginormous building. And I still have, lots of, trepidation about that whole decision and just how it was all performed. Like, I was very much into, natural building, natural construction, and I spent 3 years building this gigantic megaplex that's full of drywall and foam insulation, and it's just, it was a little hard to handle. But what we did was invest in infrastructure for the farm. And so this giant megaplex has a commercial kitchen in it, it has a wood shop in it, it has plenty of activity space for classroom, for general activities, for the work that needs to be done on the farm. It has a mega root cellar. It has a yoga and recreation space. It has a library. It has a crafts room. And it has overnight accommodation space. So this megaplex, multiplex, has all of the facets in it that we need for our independence, as well as to generate revenue. What we learned very early was that we weren't going to be able to, sell this lettuce for high dollar, but we had to figure out a way to make use of our resources. And so the fundamental principle there is value adding. So, we grow some garlic, and we know, the garlic, the market for commercial garlic, maybe you get $8 a pound for it, which isn't a whole lot, really, Potatoes, it's even worse. The commercial market for potatoes, sometimes potato prices go down to 5 cents a pound. I mean, you cannot even pay me to go outside for 5 cents. Let alone grow potatoes, pick them up and carry them to somebody for 5 cents a pound. That's ridiculous. So what you got to do is figure out a way to make more money off your potato, get more value out of it. So what we've chosen to do is use that commercial restaurant element to put it on people's plates. So we have potatoes down in our root cellar right now that come next weekend, we're going to take 50 or 60 pounds of them and bring them upstairs, chop them up, and people are going to come to us for breakfast. You heard about this breakfast. And then we're going to serve the potatoes. After that, we're going to clean the plates and call it a day. It's a lot different than having to go to the farmer's market. You're hauling everything up, you're dragging it out in the hot sun, you're talking to people all day, then whatever doesn't sell, you drag it back home, put it back down in the basement. It's a lot more work. You have to leave the house. You have uncertainty. Here with putting it on people's plates in sort of a farm to restaurant type atmosphere, how many guests do we got tonight? Well, I guess that's how much we're going to pick. And that's how much we're going to serve. And then this is how much more we're going to get paid. Because you can, $10, $12 a plate for 5 cents for a whole pound. It's a tremendous markup. And for us, it also has so much more value. You get people out on the farm, they get to experience that atmosphere, which is sort of the whole point. Is to get people back and connected with this whole system. So we're bringing people in, they're having a great time, low-key atmosphere, the highest quality, freshest, most nutritious, nutrient-dense food available, which is, worth more money than, money's not worth anything, so it has high value. And just in this atmosphere where, the chickens, you can hear the chickens clucking out the window. You're eating the eggs straight from, you can visually see them. That is a tremendous experience for people of all ages. Some of them.
The chicken, the feature with chicken which is going to be on your lunch dish?
Well, there's two ways to go with that. But, there's eggs. Yeah, so most people are pretty good with that. When it comes to actually handling the chickens and so forth, that's the next level. I mean, we really want people to get closer to the food they eat again. So we'll also, have a workshop once a year, which is a 3-day pork fest, which, yes, it is start to finish and nose to tail. So we're inviting people to get, right up to their arm, to their elbows in the food production. It's a real opportunity there to get to know these animals different than walking by them in the freezer case. To really get that connection. And it's also to build our culture, where, in North America now, I think when you talk about pork or whatnot, it's pork chops or sausage, bacon, that's about it. Whereas if you go to other parts in the world, people's culture and people's relationship to pig, you have all these charcuterie type techniques, jamon, chorizo, there's a pancetta, prosciutto, just so many different ways to prepare pig and preserve it. It's just a whole nother thing, a way to get us reconnected to this food system. And so, for us to be able to provide this service to the community, where we're having food events 3 weekends out of the month. We have the breakfast, the pizza night, pizza and movie, and the open mic potluck, which was last night. It was really fun. You guys missed it. But those 3 events per month are events that we have no really fixed fee. It's a sliding scale donation. So if you're like a family of 6, you can come in and pay $30 if you need to, whatever. We're trying to get people in there. So to get people together in this low-key, low-cost atmosphere and put that food to them, which is once again really designed to get at a seasonal diet that we can adapt to in New England, in New Hampshire. Because somewhere along the line we have lost this. We are not eating with the seasons here anymore. We're eating from California and Chile. And, it's just like getting that whole tragedy into people's mindsets so they recognize what a tragedy it is and recognize also what lack of security and freedom and independence we have because of this system. Because if we're dependent on apples from Chile, and there's apple trees all around here, and somehow they're still cheaper, coming all the way from South America, 3,000 miles away, than being produced in our own state, then we've lost control. And if we're dependent on the food coming out of California, which is, it's a slavery system. There's people that are being enslaved. There's migrants that are being enslaved for this purpose, as well as the fossil earth is being enslaved for this purpose. The fossil fuels it requires to harvest things from a dry land in California that has a nice climate, but it's totally desert. And flash freeze them, put them in a freezer truck, ship them across the country to New Hampshire where it's below 32 degrees, and put them inside a heated building. We're here. And put them in a freezing building. Put them in a climate-controlled building in a freezer, and let them sit in that freezer while people open and shut the door all day. And then they take them home to their house and put them in a freezer. It's just like a ridiculously broke system that we need to make people aware of. And I had a question the other night, like, well, how do you convince people of doing this? We're stuck in this rut. How do you get them out? And the answer I have is the flavor. Like, that sense is so strong. It's one of your 5 senses. It's one of these things that, like, taste and smell, you can remember for your whole life. You remember that smell from somewhere. You remember that flavor from somewhere. You can, if you get the right situation, somebody that's been used to eating fast food or industrial food, and you get them the right food in their mouth, they will know the difference. They will feel the difference. They will remember the difference. And hopefully they'll act upon that difference. Because it is a powerful thing. To have had that experience myself and to come to recognize the difference, like, I have a hard time eating out. I really do. It doesn't taste right to me. So much of it has been processed to such a high level that it just sort of tastes like cardboard. And so I've gotten a real good sense of it, you know, what nutrient-dense food is, what fresh food is. And I feel it's been a tremendous improvement for my health and well-being. And once again, when we get into like the value of that, there's no value you can place on your health and well-being. So in terms of what DAcres is, it is like a rural theme park. It's got all kinds of stuff going where we're doing different activities, you know, on the landscape and so forth. So there's playground, there's outdoor kitchen, outdoor ovens, different landscape situations. There's ponds and wetlands where we experimented with rice. There's forest garden areas where we're really trying to optimize this concept of the edible forest garden. As well as there's typical field and farm type, horse, chickens, ducks, pigs. That gets me to the point where it is a little bit more unique too when we get into the discussion of how we're working with the pigs. So we're doing, we're trying to be as mutualistic in our relationship to these animals as we can. Because for me personally, I came to DAcres as a vegetarian, and I'd like to leave DAcres as a vegetarian. The pigs are helpers in developing the fertility and making the transition to a more vegetable-based diet. Because we're really to describe our land, we're on that mountainous slope. It's rural New Hampshire, which is probably, right up there with the poorest soils in the world. It's sandy ledge, we'll call it. And so the original settlers had chopped down all the trees, and it led to a lot of erosion, which certainly didn't improve the matters. And then when we get up there, it is a very vibrant northern forest, which is a very good thing. The northern forest is a beautiful thing outright. But unfortunately, you can't eat much of it. There's some acorn, there's some blueberries, some service berries, but there's not really a supermass crops and proteins that are edible for humans. So we have to make a transition. We like the forest model, and we'd like to mimic that, but I think we'd like to go for an edible forest. And so how do we make that transition? Because I've come in thick forest and tried to plant a black walnut tree, and it don't take. Like in full shade, it's too cold up here, it's just not cut out for it, particularly if it's got to produce nuts. Like it needs full sun. Like the sun is one of the big driving factors. So it needs sun and fertility to really get some of these perennials to take. So what we need is a transformation, a transition, an ecological disruption to move from northern forest to edible forest. So what we do is use a combination of a chainsaw and the pigs. So we'll come in and cut and get out building materials, firewood, mulch in the form of chips, and then we'll put the pigs on the land. We'll feed the pigs through our connections with the town of Plymouth, New Hampshire. We go to the grocery store, we go to the university, we go to all the Main Street restaurants, and we get their scraps. Bring them up on the hill instead of going to the landfill, feed those to the pigs. The pigs are building the fertility of the land. Also, keeping the northern forest from growing right back. So after a period of time, it becomes possible to cultivate that. And usually what we do is just do potatoes in rows on the contours and hill up those potatoes over the course of the year. Plant them in May, hill them up 1 month a year until you start harvesting them in September. And then at the end of the year, you have raised beds along those contours. And that's the beginning of the transition. Then we can go in there and plant our nut trees. And they have enough full sun and they have enough fertility. And while those nut trees are actually getting big enough to start harvesting nuts, which can take a long time as well, we're able to grow in the understory annuals and shrub layer, that sort of thing. So it's a process. It's a transitionary process to develop this perennial food forest. And it's exciting. I think, to go into this and have tried to just plant black walnuts in the wood and see them like fail horribly. Like, this is one of those things you do during your first 3 years because you think, oh, I just plant trees. It's been tremendous to see this turnaround. So we're actually starting to see nuts. We're getting good apple production. Like, all these sort of transitionary elements that started 15, 20 years ago are starting to bear fruit. That sort of gets me into the bigger topic of DAcres. DAcres is very good at being like an annual theme park place where people come for short and long periods of times to study agriculture and be a part of this system, right? So it's like a community-supported farm organization in this experimental mode. What we want to get very good at is lasting into the future, perpetuating, perennializing that farm ecology, for lack of a better word. So how does a farm transition from what we're normally accustomed to, like this single-family farm, where the farmer gets old, he gets 60, 65 years old, he looks to sell out, and the land at that point is so expensive that the only people that can get into it are the ones that are looking to subdivide it. Mm-hmm. Or it goes into an easement, which really restricts the possibilities of the forthcoming owners, where it marginalizes their ability to gain equity and make decisions with that land. What is the model? What is the organizational structure that will allow these small farm units to persist so that these walnut trees can get big like this? So those walnut trees can get 400, 500 years old, so they become like the ancient chestnuts in Italy that are just pumping nuts everywhere. Like, how do we change or adapt as a culture in terms of how we view ownership and how we view equity, so that these type of farm or ecologies can survive and persist? Because I've been very successful, once again, as sort of being this leader type role. For me personally, that's not the point. What we'd like to see is farms that could survive and persist without that sort of strongman or that matriarch, or even the teams of two people. Because it's great when the family farm works. It's wonderful to hear about 6th-generation farms and stuff like that. I think the more power to you, and definitely continue on as that. That's a great model when it works. But divorce is a very high percentage in a typical marriage. This 50% failure rate. You don't want to bet your farm with those kind of odds. And to depend on the inheritance model, where you have to have a bunch of kids and hope one of them will take it on, that doesn't seem like a good move either. Like, it doesn't even seem fair. What are the rest of the kids going to get? You're going to give the one that wants to take it something, and the rest, you guys get out of here. It doesn't make sense in terms of like how society should be formed to make these long-term decisions with land occupancy. Like, we have the beauty that we have before us is just tremendous, but we keep chopping it up into smaller pieces and exploiting it. Like, we need to figure out the model where we value it and look at it like, wow, I'm going to put some time in here because the future. I'm about done, so you want to go anytime.
I'm just going to ask, I have two kids, an 18 and 20-year-old. So my 18-year-old is, I think this kind of way of life, I think, even though he's gone to private schools as well, I think he could really embrace it and really love it. So for somebody like him who's going off to, he might not go to college. I don't know what he's going to do. He's going to go to community school for a little while. That's just what we do in our family. And then he can sort of figure his life out a little bit after that. But so how does he learn? Like, I guess I see it as teaching our kids that this is something that's not only out there, but it's something that they can embrace and do. Not like, oh my God, the world is being destroyed, and what am I going to do? It's so overwhelming. That how do you teach kids that you can do this in your backyard and survive and become more of a community? How do kids learn about this in a way where they feel like they can take it on and embrace it and do it?
That is a tremendously hard question. I'm so glad you asked that. Because once again, we have this group here. And whatever I can't answer, you guys, I'm sure we can do this as a group. I think that's one of the best lessons, I think, is cooperation. And I think that from my experience, what I've seen with young people is learning from their peers. So we have great ambassadors on our farm. There's 2 young people that live there, age 6 and 10, and they're just wonderful at this. Like the 6-year-old literally knows more than most educated adults as far as how to tend to the farm, and farm critters, plants, and she gives wonderful tours, and she is super helpful with all the other young people coming through. She's just like, orientation time. I'll give you a tour, and this is what we do here. A little shy on the video games. We don't necessarily have Wi-Fi, but oh no, we don't have self-service. We do have Wi-Fi.
So I can bring them up and you can check it out.
Oh no! This place that we're having up at DAcres is totally designed for that. And part of our process is, we do take on youth in groups and with family. So you could come up as a family and spend the weekend and participate, with the chores and whatnot, and the cooking and all that we to do. And also, we do entertain lots of school groups, Boy Scout groups, that sort of thing. We have the facilities, and so they can have an immersion experience. And it really is, it all comes back to the food. Whatever activity we're doing, outdoors, whatever, it all comes back to the food. And I think that sharing those moments in time, and actually, I'll put it in a 4-letter word, that love is what can really drive it. Face to face, really enriching yourself, being wealthy, eating the best food, and spending that face time together. What's more to life? So I think that's a huge motivating factor. Russ, do you have something?
Oh, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on what you said. So those of us in the room that are my age, late 50s, early 60s, we remember when kids, as we were growing up, if they were working on farms, they were kind of embarrassed to admit it because they would think that people would look down on them, oh, you're rubes, you're hicks, whatever. And now farming is cool. A lot of young people realize that, and it's something that kids aren't ashamed anymore to say that they're in farming. In fact, other kids say, how neat is that? What are you doing? And stuff. And there's a lot of different ways that that's being expressed. Like, for example, there is an organization called the Greenhorns that came from a documentary film that a woman, Severine von Scharner-Fleming, filmed, just giving example after example of young people getting into farming and how they did it and what they're doing and stuff like that. It's a very inspiring movie. And now there's a whole website set up that is a nerve center for people that just want to say, how do I do it? What's involved? And all kinds of opportunities for visiting farms, apprenticing on farms, just living on a farm for a while, seeing what it's like, and all of that is because the kids that I know of that are doing it are really enthusiastic about it and very eager to share how cool and how fun it is.
Well, I should probably add that Isham and I are starting a farm. We're 52 years old, 51, 52 years old, and we're corporate women that don't like it. So, we are going to start a little quarter-acre found a piece of land that this wonderful man is letting us farm for nothing. And so he is going to be part of that. I want him to get into, he's got a very architectural mind as well. So it's how can he take what he's naturally good at because we're farming a very flat, square piece of land, but to take it the next step and to really make it a lifestyle, so he can, that's what, and help others, I guess, at some level, through design and that sort of thing,
Well, definitely, if he's got that sort of mind for architect or sort of envisioning through pictures and whatnot, the edible forest gardening is a great resource. The permaculture design manual,
Your book.
John Jeevens is a well, it's dated, but is really what is it? Biointensive model. John Jeevens' biointensive model is a great resource. The designing and maintaining an edible designing and maintaining an edible garden by Robert Cork is a great reference.
Can you get a degree, or can you go to college for something like this, or no?
Yes.
The UNH's offering a lot of agricultural
Oh,
classes too.
Yeah.
They've just started a sustainable agriculture program in the
They
last
have.
couple
Costs
of
a
years.
fortune.
Right, that's true.
We just keep going on in terms of education opportunities. There is a place called the Farm School in Athol. There's Sterling College. It's got a great program, very much hands-on. All this stuff is, as far as I can tell, ridiculously expensive. There is a tremendous amount of cost that goes into it. Look at some of the Sterling College programs for like a charcuterie, a 10-day program is like $2,500. Like, oh, killing me! I can afford that. But it's just because we don't have support at the at the level of the government that we really need support. All these programs currently are very much fringe. They're trying to bring these programs into the curriculum. They require a lot of skills to teach. They require a lot of materials to teach properly. And frankly, our education system is just used to dealing with pulling down the screen and projecting something on there, and then they're supposed to take a multiple choice test. It's a different level of education and skills building that we need to undertake. And so I think a lot of that is trying to develop more farms that are education centers. And so possibly, look at yours as a potential model, different ways to incorporate, your peers or others in that whole process.
Yeah. So actually, I'm from India originally, and what I've seen here, I saw a documentary. I think you showed that movie in which they have converted all the school cafeterias. Was it? I'm not sure. I saw it where they converted all the food cafeterias into ready-made food. Sorry, it was a Michael Moore's new movie, which is fine. And we as individuals probably can, change it around, because a bulk of even suburban kids depend on the school cafeteria, whether it's free or the parents are paying money for this industrial food complex. So I was wondering if you you can just start one small town at a time, and the school is is one of the most costly part of the, not costly, it takes a big part of this town budget. And instead of subsidizing industrial food complex, like you said, instead of feeding just a restaurant, you feed the whole school, you are actually stimulating the local economy.
Yeah, I think on many levels we just need to localize the food and energy production as much as possible, and as much connection as we can give people to their own food. I got in a little bit of an argument at one of these things where I go out and speak with a woman who was convinced that even though she ate chicken, she probably should never had to have killed a chicken.
How do you pull that off?
In the big picture, I think, if you're going to eat a creature, maybe at some point get your hands a little bit into it. They're a little dirty to see what it takes. And to be so far removed that we would be absolved of that responsibility forevermore, I'm not sure we can take that kind of road. The situation in 1900 in the United States, about 50% of the people were involved with agricultural food production. Now it's less than 2%. You know, it depends on how you count it, but 1 out of 100 people is responsible for feeding the other 99. And that's unreasonable. We are living at this stage in a non-reality. It's just it's like the guy in Egypt who got all those people to stack them rocks for him, so he could put all his treasures in them and live in it for eternity. Like, who's believing this? You know, but we're living in sort of with these cultural myths. And when history shines upon us, I'm sure we're going to be a little ashamed.
Well, can you get back to the sustainable vision of how to maintain things for hundreds of years in a stable, ecologically sustainable way?
Perennial farming college.
Yeah, I think that we are developing a new concept of ecology.
I mean, the social structures. You're going to finish that.
Yes, exactly. I think we need to look at ourselves as part of an ecology. And so we need to recognize our limits in terms of resources, and we also need to recognize our presumptions or myths. And one of these presumptions is that competition is what's going to make us all stronger. Right? So that's the I don't know if it is a myth of our society. That's how we're based on our society. And some of that is based on, this sort of misinterpretation of Darwin. Is this whole strongest, fastest, biggest, buffest is going to win. And that's not the quote. It's the ones that are most adaptable to change that are going to win. And so we're stuck in this competitive mentality. And as long as we get together in groups and can't leave that competitive mentality behind, we are going to beat each other up. We're going to continue down that road. So to get to the point where, we can look around in the Plymouth Valley and recognize that we all need to shape up the Plymouth Valley so we can build our economy, so we can get more tourism, so we can get more, so we can build our food security, so our youth will stay in the Plymouth Valley. We need to stop competing with one another on a local business level, on Main Street. I think the other myth, perhaps, that we're working with is ownership. The fact that people can own a piece of land. I could own a 1/4 acre, drill down, get me some fracking juice, and then pollute everybody's water for the 3-mile radius around my 1/4 acre. That should be illegal. Just because you own a little postage stamp, you're going to be able to pollute all the groundwater? I've never heard of that. But we do the same thing with air. We've been polluting air and water like this nonstop. And where it gets even crazier is we're going to start buying parcels of air. I mean, that's ultimately what a carbon tax is, right? So now we're going to buy and trade air. And so somebody can pollute it. I bought it. I can pollute it. What? The air is ours. There should be no myth.
So back to his question, what do you consider it's an important thing because my grandfather and grandmother had an apple orchard and they gave it to my father's sister and she is now in the 80s and none of her children wanted to get into the apple business, so she had to sell it off. So how do you have any ideas or any proposals that how do you transition it so that it doesn't become like a resort or a vacation home for whatever millionaires or gazillionaires, and it still remains a farm and it's like self-sustaining economically and provides retirement to the
If I let you keep talking, you're going to make the question even harder. Because it is. It's the question of our times. Really, how do we break this cycle? what are the tools that we can use? And it's different. Different formulations have been applied to this same dilemma. And so you have people from the farming or organic gardening type community approaching this. And you also have people from like an eco-village type model approaching this, and sort of this old commune type movements, who are looking at ways to occupy the land intergenerationally. And so some of that is business structure. One of the business structures that may apply to formulating a cooperative ownership model is in fact dated, but it has been used for this purpose as a condominium owners association. Because it allows you to get equity out. You buy a section of it that you can transfer. And you pitch in, everyone pitches into the kitty to like keep up with the plowing and the clubhouse and that sort of thing. So potentially you could all own the orchard as a condominium association and own different facets of it, and all pitch in to the seasonal harvest fest and all get out equity. The other structure that I think is helpful to consider when we get into this is the B Corp. The B Corp is a new classification of limited liability, and it's got the ability to have a social mission, and so people can donate to you. You're not as responsible to the stockholders strictly for profit. You can also be responsible if the mission is being successful, then that can offset some of the need to drive the profit. So
is this
that'd
something
be a
new?
good.
Is this just
B
started?
Corp's fairly new. In New Hampshire, I think it's in the last 5 years. B Corp's been legitimized in Vermont for probably over 10 years.
What about Massachusetts? Is this local to New Hampshire, or you
I
don't know?
believe they have it in Massachusetts now.
Okay, good. I know nothing about Massachusetts.
It exists.
Sorry, yeah. But okay, I have just the facets that I think is sort of driving. Go ahead. You were very ready to say something.
Well, I did want to say, I think there's not one answer to this question, and I think it's going to take a lot of creativity and a lot of work on annoying policy things that not everyone loves, but are really important in how they shape what we can and can't do. But I wanted to mention that there is a farm in Newmarket, New Hampshire, New Roots Farm, and that was an older couple whose kids didn't want to take it over, who sold it to a young couple, Jeff and Renee Kantara, and they worked out some really fancy stuff to make that happen. That was, not your typical land transfer, and they're very happy to talk with people who find themselves in that situation and help come up with ideas with them. So that's a local resource for people. Say again? New Roots Farm. They go to the farmers markets and all that, and I'm sure you can find them. So
it seems like it's so unique to each land holding and the people involved that it's almost like we need to have some driving principles and ethics, but it needs to be almost determined on an individual basis how to make these transfers happen. I think where we really need to be at mentally is to sort of open the breadth of what we're willing to consider. And because there's just been sort of this very narrow focus on what's possible. Before we go, I just add that one more myth that I have in my head is the myth of money. It's really driving our culture in so many different ways. And it once again goes back to sort of this ownership thing. I mean, ultimately, we are all renting from the government. If we stop paying taxes, then they own our land. So it's just like a rental agreement. It's not ownership. Stop paying taxes, you're going to lose it to the man. Within that, the whole thing of money, it's a printed, the government, that same government that owns your land, is printing that paper, and 200, 300 years ago, they were using shells instead. So it's, as things change, and as our systems change, And I think the value of that commodity, money itself, may no longer be as important in the future, or should not be as important in the future. And it's something that can transition, because it certainly gained a lot of importance more and more recently. Yes, ma'am.
Just get back to you, we're talking about pathways for kids going to school and e-college. You know, I wouldn't discourage people from the financial front, because there's a lot of science money out there. And in California, for example, they have a whole school of integrative education with Berkeley, and now people are being trained in cultural ecology, and social ecology, and spiritual ecology, which I know because my daughter is getting a PhD in all of that, and I didn't know what she was talking about because I'd never heard that here. But she went through the math bio undergrad, you know, and hasn't paid a cent for any of her upper college education, because it's all falls in this umbrella of science. And but in the West Coast, they're teaching teachers to teach permaculture and, you know, all of this social ecology, cultural ecology, spiritual, and how to use the plant status that are medicinal instead of, you know, people in Peru that are flooding the Amazon. I mean, we're really directly affected by all of that. So there are people out there who are getting the money to do it for FDA or Women in Science or whatever it is. So it shouldn't be so discouraged to get into that, because if you work hard to get money, you find it out there for the sciences and all of that. And I just happened to be able to spend some time with her this fall where she was going to school and everything. I was just blown away with how the curriculum is so far ahead of anything I've seen here. She did her undergrad at UC, Colorado State, and there was a huge group of people working on farming and teaching it, and learning techniques and how to bring it into the culture. Idealists in the world.
Yeah, I think it is definitely shifting. There's growing interest within the higher education to focus on these topics. I think it's driven by the students. You know, the institutions are in fact competing with one another to provide the hippest thing possible. You can see, there's a class actually building a tiny house for us at the local University of Plymouth State this semester, which, you know, 5 years ago even, I couldn't imagine them doing like a vocational class of this nature. It's really exciting to see. And I have to agree with you in terms of the overall shifts. Like, I am really a beneficiary of the earth-based education programs that came into place after 1971. I was born in 71. It was the year that, you know, the first Earth Day, these pictures from space really captivated our culture. And the people that were in the education system when, you know, I was in elementary school were the people who were teenagers when that all went down. So they were really primed up to give me that kind of earth-based education, that connection that I, you know, really benefited from my whole life. So it is happening as people get more involved in education, and as we improve the curriculums, as we improve our ability to spread these ideas. We have a program right now going with a local elementary school, Canaan Elementary, and it's a school garden. And you look at the back of their school right now, and it's a mowed field. At the end of this summer, there's going to be a garden there. That is just a huge, huge step for that little elementary.
The majority of schools are doing.
Well, unfortunately, this one did not yet. So to go through that process is just like you're saying, like a sending them into orbit. It's really great to see. But it is steps that need to be taken. Like we're going to need more than a school garden. So keep going in that direction. I think along these lines there's a quote from Wes Jackson that some of you may have heard. Wes Jackson is the guy that is the real driver behind the Land Institute. And what they're trying to do at the Land Institute in Kansas is develop perennial grains.
Yeah, I saw that.
So that whole concept where instead of every year us having to go into the Midwest and turn all the soil, and we're going to lose carbon every time we do this, to have the whole Midwest full of perennial grains, where you would plant this stuff once and reap it every year. And it'd just be getting, stronger and stronger root systems and more vibrant and sequestering more carbon while still supplying us with our food that we need for our culture. It's a huge undertaking. It's like, well, if you've ever been around and explored in the Southwest and seen the little things of corn that have become these big things of corn, like that takes 1,000 years. So Wes Jackson is trying to develop this perennial grain. And his philosophy is, if you've taken on a problem that's so small that you could solve it in your lifetime, you haven't taken on a big enough problem.
How is he getting funded?
I think at this point he's got a MacArthur grant, through the years, and there is some interest through the land grants, and he's been around for some time now. It's taken off pretty well. It's one isolated location, but I think it really does, to me, it's the concept that we need to be thinking well into the, generations to come. It's like I'm totally excited to have lived this life and know that, perhaps children I know are going to be fine. We're all living on this planet and enjoying these wonderful benefits of life. But ultimately, I'd like to know that, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 generations into the future are going to survive here. I want to be planning for right on as long as we can go. And so how do we ensure that? How do we plan for that instead of just planning for next week, next month, next year? Our planning is so limited in some regards. So I think if there's a way we can change our perspective and act today with that perspective of we want our culture to survive for millennia, I think we would behave a little bit differently.
It's reorienting from growth economically to something else, whatever that is.
Happiness. Yeah, I think it is. And it really goes back to this goal. Once again, I really love permaculture because it is goal-oriented. And we've succeeded very much in our culture in exploitation and garnering resources and creating wonderfully comfortable environments, but we failed miserably at taking care of the place and each other. So we just need to reorient our goals and work towards them and design systems that meet those needs. All right, I guess I'm going to leave it at that. Does anybody have any other quick questions? Oh, yeah, you're ready.
I'm ready. I just wondered about the land trust model for protecting farmland and what your thoughts are about that.
I think land trust and conservation easements are a good tool, and I think they're important tools. I think they're sort of, were developed as a triage mechanism. When we were facing really devastating growth and devastating development, it's like, well, we got to figure out something to do quick. So we've sort of fallen back on that model. I think we need more tools. And I think those tools are somewhat limited. My concern with the trust, and it's really outlined pretty thoroughly in the book, is that trusts tend to consolidate. You form a public entity, you have a 5-person board, you need a 5-person board to keep that thing going. So that means after those people die, you need another 5. You need somebody that's interested enough to be doing this on a non-paid position, to be in charge of that land, perpetually into the future. If you have troubles with your trust, like say your trust isn't Baker Valley Trust. They're in charge of like 10 properties. One of the properties gets transferred to another owner. That owner decides to build a skate park or speedway or something on the land. He violates the trust. You have to go to court with him. He may or may not win, but it's going to cost you a lot of money as the trust. Where do you get that money from? You have to raise funds from the public, or you go belly up and that guy does what he wants. So trust in general, from what I understand, it's just you need to keep acquiring land, to keep paying your staff, and to keep paying your legal fees. So where's that money coming from into the future? I know there's a little, I'm planning 50 years ahead. Where's that money coming from? Because more and more people are going to be violating these trusts. Because the land's transferred, the original owners aren't going to be there. So there is trust insurance that they're buying and consolidating if you can afford it. But this is going to be a problem. And so trusts are stockpiling money for legal costs. And they know it. They have a staff. They're looking to preserve their staff and, save that land. But they're in a pinch because they're going to need money to do it. What I fear is that these units, these entities are going to consolidate, and there's going to be a bunch of suits sitting in the chairs of power. And not that wearing a suit or anything is wrong, but it's not maybe the original intention of the people who set aside that trust for agricultural purposes. Maybe that person would choose to lease that to a corporation at that juncture. Or different decisions are made by different people based on different interests, and these things happen. So you have a comment to add to that as well?
Well, it's not really on the trust thing, but it was just another concept that I see getting started a little bit, and I've been trying to kind of work with my town on a very limited success rate so far. But I think, like as we see the young kids start to, look toward permaculture and communities, it's not a foreign word anymore. Most people at least have heard it. But how we used to have town commons and all the farmers could graze their sheep on the town commons, and to start to use our town lands in a way that, I know there's this new entry, sustainable farming, and one of my friends started a peach orchard on town land, with the, welcome of the town, and that she's making the peaches available to town people. And I think the more that we start valuing our town land and maybe getting neighbors to work together, well, you've got sunny land, so maybe you plant a couple peach trees, and I've got some acorns, so maybe the town uses my acorns or my 5 neighbors around me. That I think that model, because we do have houses too close together, we're not set up to everybody have their own, 5-acre plot and have a kin's domain, but we do have towns that could work together. We have town land that could be used for something better than another football field.
Yeah, I think there's totally many different ways that we can think outside the box and learn to share these resources. I think ultimately what we've got to protect or find ways to provide people security as to, if they invest in something, are they able to get out the equity or at least be in charge of the decision or accountable for some of the decision making with the piece of property or some such? If you're investing in something of this nature into a commons, is there a way that you can continue to have some authority, or is there a way that you could possibly draw out your investment?
Well, I think that if it's town people working together, that the value of that will start to become valued by the people, and they'll, that we'll work together to say, well, this section of town we're getting, chestnuts and hickory nuts, and that section of town we're getting peaches, and they're going to protect that and share it. Like you saying, ownership has a lot of limitations, and my sister moved out to Colorado and worked in the agriculture department back in the 50s, and watched the water table drop from, to such a low level that we turned Colorado into a desert, just so that we could water golf courses in California and the valley that we're now trying to get all our food from. So I think spreading this use of land in a more productive way will help a lot.
Yeah. Well, there's all these overlapping concepts too, and it's just it's a transitionary, a time of adaptation. I think we just need to be open to piecemeal putting things together that work, as opposed to really formulating this box that everything's got to fit in.
I'm just going to add to this. So there's a wonderful book called Reclaiming the Commons. It was written by Brian Donahue that talks about Landsake in Weston, Mass., a community farm that he helped start. I worked there in its predecessor in the 1970s, weeding the vegetable fields. And one of the things they do in the town of Weston is they tap all the maple trees in town on all the private property, and the Landsake organizes it. All the kids in town collect all the sap and take it to the sugar house, which is behind the junior high school, and then they boil it down, and then all the townspeople buy the syrup. And I don't understand why that isn't replicated just about everywhere, because it's a model that works. And I'm happy to say in Massachusetts there's at least 24 different community farms that are owned by the town or a nonprofit in that town, and they're doing exactly what you're talking about. For the people that don't have the acreage to grow their own food, whatever, they'll have different fields in town that will be made available, either town-owned property or other property that we just contributed to the effort, and they make it a joint enterprise. Yeah, so that model does work in many cases.
Just so everybody knows too, Russ is a great resource for your community. He's wonderful and knows so much about edible plants, as well as obviously a lot of agricultural history and so forth. So get in touch with Russ. And you had your hand up real high. You want to say something?
Yeah, I really love that you brought that up, because I think when we talk in the large scale all the time, we get overwhelmed by integrating all the pieces. And I hear that in your story about getting there and trying to grow lettuce, and then having to scale up to the landscape has been devastated once before, it just didn't work. And then the question of how can we help our kids get engaged with all this and have meaningful livelihoods and things. I like this project because it's a community scale project. Mm-hmm. It's one facet of the food production of the food mm-hmm. system, and it's all closed loop, localized. Mm-hmm. And it's not overwhelming. Mm-hmm. It's a festival. It must be. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm assuming it's a festival. Right. And just like DAcres is festivalizing mm-hmm. the seasonality of the food mm-hmm. production is such a return to that agrarian intelligence, that physical intelligence. Mm-hmm. That's how a community of non-integrated with the land people can do it, mm-hmm. is one facet of that life. And so I think we need ways of getting in a community to inventory our biomes, find those edges of public land and even private problem land. That's another fertile place. And when I say fertile, I mean we need to make it fertile. Because the land trust system, yeah. And literally banking the nutrients on those edges. The land trusts are, they're not going to be able to address fertility either. So the more that we can, on a community or suburban scale, do agroforestry projects that are producing fodder, fuel, or food in a closed loop cycle, then the more practiced we become to say to the land trust, we have an answer for your fertility problem. We can make that pasture land a resource that is not saleable to the highest bidder. We can bank nutrients on the edge, and in that edge, you can inoculate the rest of it as soon as the farmers are on the ready to go. And that, to me, speaks to all of the kids that are saying farming is cool. They're just standing there waiting.
There's on the edge.
On the edge of what's happening. Sort of like agriculture is being held. There's a stand of old farmers that hold the land assets in farming, and they produce a very few cash crops. But there's a whole new wave of farmers that are ready to come in, and access to land is the problem. But there's massive land holdings in the land trusts. And so there's this question, and there's this conversation that's looping, but the practical skills haven't really been embrace. But I love this town. What's the name of this town that does
Weston.
Weston.
I think one other thing, what Lansing is doing is really nice. They have something called, they actually call it rented chicken. So instead of weeding, spending a lot of money on things like Roundup, they have this little chicken tract, and I don't know if it's $100 or $200 for 2 weeks. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist. And basically the chickens lead your garden. So you should do rent a goat. I'm still waiting for a program.
Another farmer that does goats to go, wherever we're doing anything.
Where is that?
It's in Georgetown, Massachusetts.
Oh, really? Okay.
The beauty of this right now is it can go on, I think, for as long as you guys like, right?
We'll transition a bit to the food.
Yeah, there's going to be food and like social hour. So, and feel free. I'm going to stick around for an hour too. If there's questions that you want to ask me aside, sir, do you have something you want to?
Yeah, I'm very intrigued with this idea of fertility, and you've been working to make edible forests. I'm really curious, since I've been reading Edible Forest Gardens book, how do we get the ideas, what works, what grows as edible forest in New Hampshire? What are the plants involved?
Well, I always go in guilds, so you're looking really to get a combination. I like black walnut, raspberry, valerian. I like butternut, what's good? Butternut, blueberry, elecampane, daffodil mix. I like everything with apples, sweet Sicily and comfrey. There's a nice understory for apples. But yeah, it's about what we're really getting into is developing this model of agriculture where it's not just rows of corn, but it's like an overstory tree, an apple, and then like a mid-story, like a blueberry, and then like an understory, like an herbaceous layer. And getting those guys all to sort of go simultaneously and work in conjunction, like a guild, and try to build fertility within sort of a closed loop system, that all we're going in there to do is harvest, maybe do some pruning. So that we're getting after building up those models. So instead of just a stand of corn, it's a fully integrated edible landscape, edible forest garden that's got multiple layers to it and is perennial and perpetuated.
So I have a few things to say here to bring us to our next level here. I do want to say that there's been a lot of talk tonight asking about resources and coming up with new models, and I think there's a lot to be worked on there. There's also a lot going on, and rather than, it's good to collaborate and not reinvent too many wheels if we don't have to. So I do want to make sure people know that in this area we have Seacoast Eat Local and we have Seacoast Local. And in fact, a few years ago we had Seacoast Local come and do a actual workshop with us on other models for acquiring land. So there are people definitely working on this with resources right in our area, and we definitely want to keep encouraging that. And if you want to see more programs on that, I'm really interested to hear that. We do, permaculture is so amazing in the garden, but it's really amazing everywhere else too. So we do want to push our programming to, not just food production, but looking at, how to organize and how to get along with each other, and there's so much more. And we do have a suggestion jar that Leslie is pointing out there. So if there is something that you really want more programming on, write it down, and we'll look at that. Also, other things to, the meetup groups are supposed to be part of this too, part of your education and ways to get, without a little more affordable ways to at least get a little bit of this education. Our workshops, our farm tours are what do we call it, homestead tours coming up in the spring, in the summer. Part of why we're doing that is to be able to give folks the ability to start looking around, seeing what people are doing, what are they planting, what's working, what's not, and build as a community these resources. And I thank you all for coming tonight, because this is part of building that community too. And I really want to thank Josh. He once again showed one thing that always strikes me about Josh is that he's so willing to admit his mistakes. Isn't that
What
awesome?
mistakes?
And that's something that's so invaluable to those of us working on it now. To what other people made mistakes on and will tell us about is pretty much as valuable as the things they're getting right. He also is incredibly generous in his time coming all the way down here, and we really hope that if you haven't gotten a chance to contribute to sending him back with a little honorarium to go towards DAcres, that you can do that. He's also going to be selling books and signing books back there. And what we are going to do is have some time here. There's going to be a potluck, and even if you didn't bring food and want to hang out and talk, maybe there'll be extra food, you know how that can be. We really hope that you'll stay and talk to each other and do a little more networking
I
here.
got one thing to add. We brought chicken soup 100% from the farm, and my thought on your final comment was really, in my experience, I think we do have the tools and the knowledge within humanity. We have 2,000 odd years of written history and so far. We have the knowledge in place. Where I think we're really lacking, and it might not be as much in wisdom as in motivation or whatever it takes to get the job done. What we're lacking is the capacity to get along. And so I think that's really where the effort needs to be put. We need to improve in so many ways. I mean, day to day, thank you, you're welcome, to just being earnestly emphatic for the guy down the road that doesn't have as much, or the guy down the road that has more and is just, wasting it. We got to figure out how to get along as a society. And so, all the permaculture techniques, plants, infrastructure, building techniques, they're all here. We have books and books full of that stuff. It's about the day-to-day living right. So if we can take that on from this room and spread the good light, more power to us. Thank you for coming.